Okay, we are live. Make sure. Looks like it. Please comment in the chat if you can hear me, how the sound is. Um, you know, uh, Comment down below, helps fuel the algorithm, and hit the like button. It boosts this type of content if you find it valuable. Tonight, we are going to be discussing uh, goals and what makes a goal a good goal and why goals are actually the key to agency and why they are critical and necessary to actually enabling in your free will and kind of what free will is and why it's important. We're going to be discussing all of that tonight. Um, Looks good and sounds good. Great. Thank you. But I'm excited for the stream. This is still the new year. It's the second stream of this year, but it is, I thought about doing this for the first stream, but I was too excited for the last stream. I highly recommend watching the last stream. We discussed a um, uh, process philosophy and a discussion on the theories of everything YouTube channel, and uh, with between Kurt and Matthew, who is a professor of philosophy, and he actually did a write up of it. I should probably link it below, and he posted it to his Substack. And I definitely always appreciate when people who I have discussed their work or a conversation that they've had, watch this stream as well and take it as seriously as I try and take, the conversations that they have, because that is the point of this stream. Actually, this is not for views. I would have not been doing live streams if this channel was really focused on maximizing views. Originally, when I first started the channel, I was like, I remember telling my wife, this was my goal, to talk about goals, that I would have 20,000 subs within, 3 months or 4 months or something like that by the end of the year, that year, 2020. And obviously that is not the case, but I also totally changed how the type of content that I was making. I at first started with pre-produced content, which I actually, that content was good for what it was at the time. My work has definitely progressed since then, but still stands up, I think, for taking the timing into account. But what I realized is that I didn't feel like it was meaningful. I didn't feel like it was meaningful, really, in an ongoing way. And even though it would have definitely maximized the amount of subs and views, I don't know if I said 20,000 views or 20,000 subs at the beginning of the stream, but I meant 20,000 subs if I said 20,000 views. But it definitely wasn't fulfilling for me at all, because all you can do is post it and you get an initial response and interaction from it, and you share it and people engage with it, and that's great. That, is fulfilling. But eventually then it's just like views. And I was just burned out by like three videos. And I then finally, had the bravery of going live, which actually took a lot. And I remember like one or two people, just random people, happened to join the live chat, and it was game changing for me because I could actually engage with people, and it felt like I was impacting someone because they were taking the time to watch the stream and engage with me, and it was a real person, and it was obvious. So I definitely feel much more fulfilled by doing these live streams, even if it doesn't end up, getting as many views. But the point of the channel also was never to get views. It was to actually start conversations with people who are engaged rigorously in the topics that I tend to focus on, and that in that respect, this channel has actually been wildly successful, and I'm very grateful for that. I think it's important to be reflective a little bit every new year, and I'm just trying to be kind of focused on that a little bit um, while we're discussing goals, and it's important to be reflective of your past and present circumstances in order to start like making a good goal. But I uh, I am definitely very grateful for the stream and for everybody that has taken the time to watch it, um, and hit the like button and comment down below. But this the goal of this channel, like I said, is to start uh, engaging with people who are involved in rigorously in discussions involving metaphysics and morality and philosophy and physics, um, and science in general, but even theology as well. But there are also other goals involving sentient singularity theory that are more long term, that are experimental. I have experiment ideas regarding some of the main premises of sentient singularity theory. We have to be there technologically, but I don't think we're that far off from that actually. It's not, I don't think the future of physics is of experimental physics it has to do with multi-billion-dollar particle colliders and telescopes. I think that it's going to be much simpler than that. But we have to have the correct metaphysics to help us frame our perspective and realize what we need to look for, and that is right now forming in the metaphysics and physics discussions that I'm seeing, and that's great. So that is involved with a goal that I have more long term. There are application goals that make use of many of the concepts in sentient singularity theory, and then I have as well that are also even potentially even longer term, maybe not. But we'll discuss those another time. But just so you're aware, there is the goals of this channel. While views are nice, it's good that if I believe in what I'm doing, or that what I'm doing is good, then I would obviously want it to be seen. It's definitely not the goal of this channel, and there are other goals involved that are very specific and actually have been there since the beginning. And it's important to keep that in mind, because what I see and what I feel, even with myself sometimes, is that, and you see this with everybody who gets involved in business or content creation or whatever, it's like, there are certain things that usually link to money eventually, whether it's views or, maybe it's just views and it has nothing to do with money, but usually starts that way, that eventually it ends up, monetization becomes a factor. It ends up starting us on this cycle of reactivity. And the problem with this, and I'm not saying that it's wrong to monetize. I actually think that it's the ideal is to be able to monetize that which you would do anyways, like this. And if you can support yourself doing what you would, trying to achieve the goals that you have, that is ideal. But being reactive is not the same thing as having goals. In fact, it's the opposite. And being reactive is the key to destroying your agency. It's interesting because I started using this program that my wife showed me that helps create shorts and uh, clips and captions and timestamps and stuff like that very recently. And thumbnails, and I haven't really used it for thumbnails or anything like that, but it can be used for those things. I used it for captions on the not captions, for timestamps on the last stream. Uh, and even then, you know, you have to go in and delete the ones that are irrelevant and add in the ones that you want that it missed and stuff. But it does help save time, and in that way, those types of tools are great. But one of the things that it has as a feature is that it you can use it to suggest your video topics for the next videos. And I didn't test this out. I'm kind of curious to see what would happen if I did test it out and see what the AI feeds back to me. But I said to my wife, I was like, you know, if you do this, because it just takes YouTube's algorithm and what it knows about it, and or what, you know, is known about it, and it factors it into whatever algorithm they have, and looks at trends and you know, viewership based on certain captions and hashtags or whatever, and tries to give you some suggestion that will maximize your views and engagement in the next one. And I was like, well, that's kind of cool. That's like pretty intricate if it actually works. But then I realized, if that's what you're doing, then it's not your channel anymore. It's not at all your channel. It is, you've become just this, I don't know, like, vessel to be used by the algorithm, and which is, you know, by, I guess, people who are probably also being reactive to content that isn't necessarily what they're seeking, because that's just how the internet works in many cases. But I realized that this is counterproductive to goals and agency. It removes your agency. If I didn't pick my video, my topics and discussions and streams to air, then it's not my channel. Even if it's my face and it's my words, it's not my channel. And that really got me thinking about meaning, and how it's really like super tied into agency. Because meaning, I believe that meaning is the meaning of multiplicity is the creation of meaning. Essentially, it's like the point of God creating multiplicity of sentience within his oneness is for the creation of meaning, because you have to impact another sentient being in order to be meaningful. And so, but what is the definer of multiplicity, of differentiation between beings, is agency. It is free will. And this is not a concept that is really understood well in today's times, in a practical sense or even in a conceptual sense, because our metaphysics doesn't actually support the existence of free will, even though our experience does support the existence of free will. And in my discussion that I in my stream that I did last week, I talked about how you have to start with your experience, and you have to trust that your experience and your firsthand experience is truer than secondhand information. And so if your science and if your metaphysics is built on science that you only have a secondhand understanding of, and it contradicts your firsthand experience, in order to actually think, you have to actually trust your firsthand experience over your secondhand scientific knowledge. And we don't do that in today's times. And so because of that, it basically, it's opposed to the concept of agency. I'm going to play a clip that I've talked about on here and maybe even showed of Brian Greene on here tonight, because it just perfectly sums up the issue. Uh, but this freedom of will is what differentiates you from me, and us from God, and even us from ourselves. And ideally, we would want to align with the logos of the generative chain of sentience that is being created. But it is necessary that we have the choice to do it or not, in order for anyone to be meaningful at all, for meaning to exist. And when I say meaning, I mean, like, I don't mean meaning in terms of, like, what does that symbol mean. I mean meaning like having an impact on other sentient beings and feeling meaningful, which is actually being meaningful. It's the only meaningfulness that actually can exist, is your impact on another someone. And that means that there has to be other someones, and the difference between one someone and another is your one having their own freedom of will, which is really the ability to set your own goals, but most fundamentally, which is what we're going to talk about more tonight. It's because there are so many other factors. There are physical constraints, there are instinctual drives, there are addiction issues that people have, and there are social situations that factor into all of our decision making. And that's true from everyone from hadrons to God, even. And all these things can have an influence on our decisions and on our ultimate, our ultimate actions. But if we're going to talk about choices, we have to actually start with the first choice that you can make, which is to honestly, humbly, and humility is the ability to be honest with oneself about oneself, set your own goals. And like I said, ideally you would want to align with the goals of the beings that you're within and therefore subject to, God, creation, and then your cells would want to align themselves with your goals. But you have to be able to choose, and they have to be able to choose. And I actually think that cells make choices. Just as, I don't know if it's just as much as us. I don't know if that's the right terminology to use, but they definitely have the ability to make choices. I think that even atoms and hadrons, protons and neutrons, have the ability to make choices. That doesn't mean that their choices are not going to be predictable. You have to realize that there is a scope of perspective that each one of these sentient beings has. And if they have enough of a perception of the big picture, or of the relevant picture that they need in order to make the choice of aligning themselves with God, then their choice should actually be extremely predictable. And somebody said to me when I was first presenting my work to some people in a physics Discord that I was banned from, that I've talked about on here, they said, nobody thinks hadrons are a sentient being. And I was like, I think hadrons are a sentient being. And he was like, that doesn't make any sense, because if that were the case, then nothing would be predictable. You couldn't predict anything. And I was like, you're a sentient being and you're very predictable. I realized his perspective on a lot of this stuff, and I was able to predict exactly how he was going to act in reaction to my work, because he was just reacting to it. He wasn't acting, he was reacting. And to react is to give up your agency, and especially when you give up your agency, you become especially predictable. And if you act and you have enough of the big picture in order to see what you need to do, like we can look at cells and be like, we know what they have to do. Because if they don't do what their jobs and they try and just be, too individualistic and not submit themselves to the well-being of the whole, they go metastatic and you get cancer. Whether they do that because they are lacking enough of the big picture that they need to see, or they're lacking the relevant information for some reason that they need in order to understand what they need to align themselves with, or maybe they just made a choice to, go against God. But I don't think that is usually a choice that most sentient beings would make if they truly had enough information, because they would realize that it was fruitless. It would only result in fruitlessness. If a cell was able to see that going metastatic led to the death of the world that they exist in, which is, a organism, multicellular organism, then they wouldn't most likely do it. And so I believe as the universe is stacking these levels of sentience, this periodicity that I've talked about on here, like 7, 8, 9 levels of or periods of sentience, depending on how you're counting, each time you get stacked, the perspective of the beings that have just been stacked becomes much more obvious. Of the perspective of the whole or of the relevant information becomes much more obvious. So the entire level gets much more predictable. And so you would look at atoms and you'd be like, they always do exactly what I expect. It's like, because you know what they need to do in order to form bonds and stack and up level into a larger assembly. Same thing with cells. We have the perspective of the world that the cells are in. We can see their whole world. We know what happens if they don't do their jobs and they go metastatic. They don't always know, but we do, because we're looking at it from a God's eye view from their perspective. We are a level above looking at their world as a whole. And so as soon as you get stacked, though, most likely the majority of the beings that unite into a sentient assembly on the level below would all get very aligned. And so cells are pretty predictable, actually, about what they're supposed to do. Sometimes they're not, but usually they are. And molecules are probably even more predictable, and atoms and hadrons are probably even more predictable. And so as you get more stacked, each level below gets even more and more and more predictable, because they get headed by a sentient being that sees a bigger portion of the picture. And so we don't think about the world as a process. And so we look at it and we say, that thing has no goals because it's perfectly predictable. But the thing is if you knew which of your goals would be most likely to, not even most likely, but would result in fruitlessness or could result in growth and the maximization of your meaning, in the logos of the cosmos, then you would become extremely predictable. That doesn't mean that you don't have choices that you've made. It just means that you see which choice. It's easier to see which choice is the right choice. And there is a right choice especially when there's a moral consideration. Sometimes, I don't want to say sometimes there's no moral consideration, but because I'm not sure about that. But there are certainly times when it's much more obvious that there's moral consideration, and in other choices, there might not be as much moral consideration. But I don't even know if in those instances you actually can really make choices, because if either if this doing this, playing baseball or playing soccer, which one's the more moral choice? It's like you wouldn't be making a choice. It would be like, which one do you like better, which is a matter of instinct. And so it's not really, I don't know how much it's really a free will choice to decide, quote unquote, between like playing soccer and playing baseball. It's probably just an instinctual action, not which kind of makes it a reaction, but it's not actually like a free will choice, probably, which is fascinating. And it's like we don't think about that as what, like, not, you either think that's an instance of free will or you don't, but not for the reasons that I just laid out. Usually, at least, I'm not saying you specifically wouldn't have got this. Maybe you did, but most people involved in physics and philosophy, I don't think, do think about this. It's like this, some of, I think that almost a moral consideration is almost a necessity when it comes to like a free will choice. It's like you need a goal and you need a moral consideration, and you need awareness of the choice of a choice, which is just interesting to think about. But let me go to the chat. You are Ashkenazi. You have an ostensibly high IQ. Not everyone who is Ashkenazi in their ethnicity has a high IQ, but, and also, like, I will say, among the people that I interact with, I actually have a lower IQ than the average, probably. Which is, that's definitely not true of, compared to like the average IQ of the world, or even of the people in the US or whatever, the people, probably even the people on my block, but like among my friends and associates, like I probably have a low, like slightly lower than the average. But I will say this honestly, I am a better thinker than most of them. It is a skill. It's not just a matter of IQ. It is absolutely a skill. Like I would put my ability to think through a a, a process or a a question up against anyone's, like Chris Langan included. Like, and Chris Langan's obviously has the highest IQ that I know of, at least. Very, very, obviously very intelligent, and also I would say, smart person. But I don't think they're necessarily the same thing. Smartness, you have to factor wisdom into it as well. And nobody's perfectly wise, which means nobody is all smart other than God. Because, like I said, you need to see the big picture in order to be as wise as is possible. You need to see everything that there is to see, and from within the system, it is impossible to see everything that there is to see. Only the system itself can see everything that there is to see, and that system is God. So he's the only one who is truly all wise. He can't not be, actually. But yeah, I think thinking is a skill. It's funny because I remember when I was really like kind of renewed my interest in IQ, probably like I just realized the disparity in IQ, probably like, I don't know, like about 10 years ago in the world. And I knew that there was like a range, but I didn't really know the range. Especially on the lower end of the average, it wasn't just like people who had injuries or something. It was like there were entire portions of the world where IQ is like substantially lower than other portions of the world. And it doesn't actually matter to your, it does matter to your ability to problem solve in a moment, because it has to do with problem solving with all these other constraints built in of timing and reaction and things like that. But your ability to actually think objectively or super subjectively is not really about IQ. And I remember watching people who I knew had higher IQ, measured IQs than me, fail at thinking through a specific question or problem, particularly like politically and morally. And then I remember coming across a video online of this guy who had his IQ tested, and it was in the 80s, and he had made a YouTube video, and he was like, explaining like he had his IQ tested, and it was in the 80s, and he was so much more like competent in his ability to sit and think through a question than most of the people that I know with IQs, double that, almost double his measured IQ. He was a more competent thinker. And I realized that the main thing that it came down to was humility. It's like this guy was willing to question his own assumptions. And the people with the 150 IQ were not. And it literally stopped their ability to think, and it also kind of halted their agency in a way. It hindered their agency. IQ is not. You can idol worship IQ. Someone's IQ should not be used as a proxy for whether or not they are right. At all. Like IQ is a tool. That's it. Just as much as your physical body, that is your exterior, your exteriorly, is that even a word? Perceivable physical body is a tool. Your ability to run and jump and your reach and your muscle density, whatever, is all a tool. So is your brain structure, which is also physically perceivable structure, and it's just that you don't physically perceive it yourself because it's inside you, and somebody would need to take an x-ray, or not an x-ray, but I don't know, CT scan or something, or they'd have to crack open your skull and, like, I don't know, look at your brain or something. I'm sure there's a way. I'm not saying science will ever really get there completely, but I don't think that it has to either, to just measure potential IQ just by like a CT scan or something like that. But it also doesn't really matter because, like I said, what matters is your ability to think, and that is a skill that anyone can improve to the point where you can actually dramatically alter your competency. Like the most important, it's funny because the easiest way to become competent is to realize is to be humble enough to realize what you're competent at, and that as a whole kind of is the most important aspect of competence, of general competency, is an understanding of your competency, but also a willingness to try, that is a choice. That is for the most part, it's a choice. I mean, there's also I do believe some people have more drive than others in general, but I also, and it's that's complicated. It's because obviously we all have our passions, but that's different than drive. Drive is like stubbornness, but like striving stubbornness. I don't know how you would combine those two words. I'm trying to think of a funny combination between stubbornness and striving, but that would be like the perfect word to describe will. But I mean, maybe will is just the perfect word for it. But it's just your individual, like, drive, I guess. But the freedom of will is the ability to take that and just point it at different places. I don't think you have you do have agency in taking actions, but like I guess you're just like maybe it's it's like your sensitivity. I'm trying to think of a metaphor that works, like of like your gas pedal or something, but um of a car. But that I don't know how much that's like freedom, that a choice for you, but your ability to choose where you want the car to go is the first choice. And you might not be able to actually drive the car exactly in the direction that you want, but like you couldn't you'll never really find out how close you can get until you actually choose where you want to drive. And so that's the first choice to that's the first component of agency is what is setting a goal. And so a long time ago I tried to come up with a way of um you know like what are the four components, and it would be four primary components because of the four primary perspectives that we just perceive in every complete structure. Um, uh, you can see this in music. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's like a four chord song. It's the song that it's the same song. We've done a stream, years ago at this point where I showed the what is it, the Axis of Awesome band, like comedy band, where they have that famous four chord song where they show that every pop hit is the same exact song. It's the same four chords at least, and it's because those four chords are kind of recognized as a complete structure. It's like, why does every car have four wheels? It's like, they basically just exposed that every car that's the common car has four wheels. Could you make a car with six wheels? Yeah. Do they exist? Yeah. Are they common? No. Can you make a vehicle with three wheels? Yeah. Do they exist? Yeah. Are they common? No. And two wheels is that obviously exists. Is it common? It's a heck of a lot less common than four wheels. So that's going to be that. Those patterns are true in everything. Uh, the the perception, the structure, the the perceptual structure of completeness, of how we judge and understand completeness is not separate from visual perceptions to the audible perceptions to even the sense of smell and taste and stuff. I don't know, and I haven't thought about it enough to like tell you what the four aspects of smell are that but I'm sure they exist. So this is what I came up with. Is I was like, good goals. And this is kind of what I came up with. Is like gaugeable, obtainable, opportune, and defined. And I tend to think always that like there is beauty and symmetry and truth in beauty, and therefore like you should kind of search for it, symmetry a bit, but obviously if you have to force it, then that's a problem. But so I haven't looked at this in a while, but these are the four. I think I at the time I had kind of deduced that these would be the four components of a good goal. It's like it needs to be obtainable, it needs to be measurable or gaugeable, which means like you need to be able to see and track your progress towards it. It can't just be a goal that you just work and work and work and work and work, and you don't know if you're making any progress until you just hit it or you don't. And it's like there's no sense of whether or not what direction you're moving towards or not. That's not a good goal, because you could waste your entire life on something and not realize that you were even heading in the right direction. So that's not a good goal, which is why I said gaugeable, because it's kind of like puts measurement and kind of this two-dimensional, towards a goal or away from a goal type of view. Obtainable, any goal that's unobtainable is a bad goal, because you're obviously like, why would you set a goal that is unobtainable? It's like, and I'm not saying that It's like if your goal is to be perfect, you will it's a terrible goal. Perfect at anything, it doesn't matter. But if your goal is to be ever better or like Im, you know, impeccable, and I don't know if that's the right term, but like I tend to think that that means, we'll look at it in a minute, the definition, but I think it tends to mean like, to me, not perfect, but an attempt at perfection. But an attempt at perfection is not the same thing as perfection. It's just like recognizing that there is an ideal and striving towards it. And then opportune is like you have to realize that you're in a place that allows for you to actually honestly attempt to achieve a goal. So, you have to, it's like these are the two, this is like outside and this is inside. It's like inside, outside, separate, and oneness. This would be kind of separate or oneness, and this would be separate or oneness, or this would be inside or outside, and this would be inside or outside. I have to think about it. Maybe we will on the stream. I'm sure that they do correspond, but I just haven't thought about it in a long time. But to be these are kind of symmetrical concepts. It's like you have to be able to obtain it, and which means like you're looking from the inside of your situation out towards your goal, and you're at the start of the trail looking at the peak of the mountain. Peak of the mountain, start of the trail, if that makes sense. Defined, this is the trail. Gaugeable, this is the trail viewed from the inside. It's like that you are on the trail. It's defined. This is the view of the trail from the God's eye view. Is like you can see how far along on the trail you are towards your goal. I have in the thumbnail of this a picture of somebody climbing a mountain, and they've reached some peak, but then they're looking at the summit, and like this is a very good not even metaphor but example of a goal. I honestly hate mountain climbing. I don't hate it, but I'm not the biggest fan of just like walking to walk. And yes, hitting the peak of a mountain is a goal that's like specific, but like I like to walk to a place in order to do some other activity. Whereas like my brother asked me the other day, would you ever want to climb Mount Everest? I was like, no, not really. Like it just doesn't sound fun to me, or appealing. And I've summited Mount Humphreys in Arizona, which is the tallest peak in Arizona. It's the tallest peak I've ever summited, and it was fun because it was a social thing, but I didn't really enjoy it on its own. If I wasn't in that social situation, I would never have just done it because I just wanted to. But I do like rock climbing, which is different because there's like a conquering your own fear of heights aspect of it that is a goal of mine, and also the technicality and the movement of it is fun for me. So that's much more like, I don't think that choosing though between going rock climbing and going to, I don't know, summit a mountain, absent any other considerations of other than which one do you want to do, is actually like a free will choice for me. I just like my instincts just are more catered towards enjoying rock climbing despite having a fear of heights. Partially because of having a fear of heights. Like there's no fear in like just climbing, in just hiking, for me, like to the summit of a mountain. But it's just like, I just feel like I could be doing something more entertaining and also like more personally fulfilling. Finding a goal that's more personally fulfilling, which would be like getting to the top of that cliff, that's only 100 feet up, but instead of 12,000 feet up, but it's like you're climbing vertically instead of just walking along a path. So but yeah, I mean, this is, but I still think that summiting the mountain is like a very, very good metaphor and example of what I'm talking about with these good goals. It's like gaugeable is you're looking at the trail from the map perspective of like how far along are you till, and towards the goal of reaching the summit. Opportune is like, are you at the trail? Like if you're not actually at the start of the trail, then you can't actually start pursuing that goal yet. Then your goal has to be like, let's get to the trail first. But defined is, is there a trail, and is your goal defined? Of you're not just trying. If you're like, my goal is just to walk, and it's like that's not really a goal. Like it needs to be more defined. It's like my goal is to walk 5 miles. That's a defined goal. Because how do you just achieve the goal of my goal is to walk, unless you literally like can't walk and you're just trying to walk? My daughter, what's funny is that her goal right now is to walk. Like, and I can see it. Even as she's 1 year old, she has a goal of walking. She looks at us walking and she's like, I want to do that. It's not just this instinctual thing. She has to literally try to do it. And it is unnatural, at least to start to do it. Once you can walk, it comes much more naturally, but it isn't very natural to walk. I mean, it's a very odd behavior actually to walk on two legs. Like crawling is probably pretty natural, but not walking on two legs, even for people, I don't think. And so her goal is to walk, but once you can walk, then your goal isn't just, my goal is to walk. That's not a defined goal. And there's no gaugeability to it. There's no like opportunity to it either, because if you just can walk, then you're just going to walk now. And why, like that's not a goal. And I realized that this is kind of, I've been in this spot a little bit for the last like probably 6 months. I had this goal of moving, and then we moved, and now we're just like caring for a baby, my wife and I, and you don't know what to expect, and you're kind of at the mercy of just reacting to as this new being that you have to keep alive and teach and empower. It's like something in my eye, sorry. But there, as as now we're like realizing how to be parents a little bit better, or settling into this new place and settling into the role of also like being parents, it's become like clear that I need to set better goals. One of the things I realized is I was setting goals and they were not gaugeable, because it was like my goal was sometime next year or within the next year to do this. And it wasn't something that required a year. And the problem with that is it's like there's no gaugeability really, even though you're starting to get there, because it's like within a year. If it's a project that is going to take around a year, then yeah, then maybe that's gaugeable. But if it's not a project that takes a year, it's a project that takes a month or 2 months, and you have a year now to do it, it's almost like you're not going to do it because you don't know when to start, because you haven't set a goal that allows for you to gauge whether or not you're moving towards success or not within the span that you've framed the goal. So from the perspective of the framing of a goal that you set, you have to be like, it has to be gaugeable from start to finish. And that is, if you have one goal that your goal is to do something that takes 2 weeks or 3 months, even within 1 year, and it's not nestled in between other goals that have to come in order, then you've misframed it, and so like you've destroyed your ability to gauge it. So I kind of want to Google these, but let's address the chat first. High IQ isn't always the most important thing. It's definitely not. What's up, Torin? It's been a while. Sometimes IQ can be a hindrance to wisdom. It certainly can become an idol. IQ. Anything can become an idol. Religion can become an idol. Your theological tradition can become an idol. That doesn't mean that, you know, God is an idol, and it doesn't even mean that scripture is an idol. It just means like you can idolize your perspective of of a religion, even, or your understanding of religion. And I see it all the time. It's probably one of the easier things to idol worship, because you likely assume that it's not idol worship because of its association with theology. Fight or will? What's the difference necessarily? I don't know. Fight your fight, the fight in you versus your will. I don't know what's the difference. Maybe one is a bit more reactive, in it's framed in a reactive sense because you're fighting against something, versus like, I would say like will is a more direct synonym with will is striving. But it's not necessarily even the perfect synonym. I don't even know if there is a perfect synonym for will. There's definitely, I would say striving is closer to will than fight. But fight is you know, it's aligned. It's it's getting there. Even rollerblades have 4 wheels. Yeah, I know. Isn't that weird? And roller skates have 4 wheels, and they have a different layout, and they both have 4 wheels. Why? Because it's just the structure of completeness. It's like how we view differentiation and incorporation into singularity that is complete. It's just how we view it. It's odd. Consciousness of nature. Everyone who cannot see the world as enchanted represents the failure of our current society. I don't know what you mean by enchanted before I respond to that, but you might be right. I just don't know exactly what you mean by enchanted. Hey guys, what's going on? What's up, memes? If I'm hiking somewhere, I want to catch some cool reptiles or see a rare bird. Exactly. I want to see animals when I'm hiking. Like that's why I go hiking usually, or I hike to a rock climb. Like that's what I hike to. I don't like just go hiking. I like hiking, but hiking for a purpose of like getting to a rock climb, or going to take photos, doing photography, getting a specific picture, or going to see a certain animal. Like that's what I like to. Those are my goals in hiking. Hiking is the map. It is not the goal for me. Some people, it is the map is the goal of when it comes to hiking, and that's not me. They're like, oh, I just did the Appalachian Trail. It's like, I'm not the type of person that ever wants to do the Appalachian Trail. I'd rather climb El Cap, but I don't even know if I'd want to do that now. But that's a matter of just fear, to be quite honest, and also me not necessarily wanting to invest the amount of time necessary to do it. In a way that I would be more comfortable with. And like, I have friends who are not afraid of heights at all compared to me. They have climbed El Cap multiple times, including like 17. They did their second summit in like 17 hours. Their first one though took multiple days, and they were terrified. If they were terrified, I would be incredibly terrified. I used to have that as a goal, but I don't anymore. Not just because of fear, but it takes a lot of. I saw people go through the preparation necessary for months and months of like working their way up different. It's called a multi-pitch climb, where like you climb a structure so high where it's too high for one rope, so you have to climb up and kind of inchworm your way up, taking the rope along the way, a 200-foot rope along the way. So, in like basically 100-foot pitches. Or 200, sometimes 200-foot pitches, but it's still like too high for that. I've done multi-pitch climbs, and those were goals of mine, and they felt like I was in like a Lord of the Rings quest, and it was awesome, but it was also terrifying. But it was also a few hours of my time, or even a day. It was like a day of my time, not like 2 months of preparation of my time, and then 3 days of absolute terror. I have more important things to do with my time. I have other goals that would take precedent to the time necessary to like invest in that, even if I wasn't afraid to do it. At this point, I didn't have those goals at the time that I had that as a goal. But um uh um just chilling here wishing it would snow more. I in I moved from Los Angeles to Texas over the summer, and I don't know if you guys can hear a clicking, but it's our washing machine, so I'm sorry if you can hear anything. But um, it should stop in a minute. But I moved from LA to um, uh, I'm from Arizona, but I moved to LA, and then I moved for 10 years, and then I moved from LA over the summer to Texas. And um, this in LA right now, it is like burning. Obviously, most of you probably know, and like it here right now, we're worried about freezing because in Texas you lose power for multiple days at a time. Apparently, whenever there's a freeze that kind of freezes the power lines, and so I ended up having to get a generator and learn about electrical wiring and gas lines and all kinds of stuff because I wanted to be able to hook it up to our gas line and run it without having to go get gasoline and or propane every 6 hours um, if we lost power for multiple days. And so we're worried about that, and LA is like worried about burning completely to the ground, and that is it's just crazy how different at the same time uh, the, these two concerns are. It's just odd, but I mean, I a friend of mine sent me this just to show while I was on a live, basically a Skype call with them. This was within the span. The fire in Pacific Palisades had started, and they looked out at it, and they showed me like they turned the camera to the hill, and this is within our just the span of our conversation. This is what happened. Isn't that crazy? Like my prayers are with everybody there right now. That is, it looks like literal hell. Um, it looks horrible. And I've been there when we were like voluntarily evacuated before, and even when I lived in Arizona, that happened to me once. There was a horrible fire called the Aspen Fire in 2003 that came very close to my house. But while I was living in LA, multiple times we had flames, 100-foot tall flames, get within like a quarter mile of our house, and but it never got closer than that, thankfully. But right now, I mean, it looks like half that town is just toast. I can't even imagine. It's horrible. But so if you're in LA and you're able to watch this, I'm glad that you're not like, I don't know, that you're not so concerned about your house right now. But and if you live in LA and you're watching this after the fact, I am you are in my thoughts. I mean, I have family there right now too, and many friends. It's crazy. It's like inconceivable how quickly those fires are spreading. I mean, you saw, and that was like an hour conversation that I was having with the people that I knew when those photos were taken. Um, and like they were just like, "Is that a fire?" In the middle of our like meeting. It was just a meeting for work, and then by the end of the call they were like, it's like the entire hill is on fire. Now it's like half the town. It's nuts. But uh, I just walked almost nonstop in my early 20s, lost feeling in my feet, had to stop. Moderation is good. Purpose is good. I don't even know if moderation is the right word, but like intentionality is key. If you just start doing things mindlessly, that's a problem, um, or can be a problem. And yeah, I don't know if moderation is the right term. People say that it's like everything in moderation. It's like not everything in moderation. There are some things that there is no amount of that is good. None. There's no amount of like heroin that is like good for you. Probably. I have no experience with it, but I would imagine that there's probably no like moderation of that is good. There's probably no amount of moderation. I don't even know if there's a moderation of alcohol that is good for you. People describe, the benefits of wine sometimes, health benefits. It's probably not from wine. It's like from antioxidants that are in grape juice or something. It's not necessarily from the alcohol. But like the effects of alcohol on us mentally, I don't think that there's really any amount of that is good. It doesn't mean that it can't be convenient socially, but that's not the point. That's not the definer of what is good, is what is convenient socially. I mean, as soon as if you don't realize that, then you will not be able to navigate morally at all. It's like that. One of the first things that every parent says to their kids that is like the primordial moral picture is like, if everybody jumped off a bridge, would you do it? It's like, obviously the answer should be no. It's interesting. I saw Mark Zuckerberg's statement about like how he's changing the strategy of involved with free expression of content or expression of content on Meta's platforms, and not opposed to what he's doing. I actually think it's a good idea, but he was in general, but some of the reasoning that he gave was like, I realize people want more of this, so like now we're gonna give them more of this. And we culturally, with where we're at now, like maybe it's like good idea to swing back away from censorship a little bit. It's like, why does the culture now matter to whether or not this was the right thing to do or not? He also had some good points, but that was not one of them. That was now everybody is not jumping off the bridge, so I won't. Or now everybody is jumping off the bridge, so I will. It's not actually a reason. It's just like saying that you have given up your agency to some other input. And you're kind of like, I mean, it's giving up of your will. It's funny, even I fall into this trap of myself. It's like, when this happens, I will do this. And it's like, one of like that preceding qualifier of whatever decision it is, like isn't necessary to whether or not I can move forward with a secondary goal. Like, it's just, which is actually the primary goal. I'm just like, it's like I'm trying to psych myself up into like an excuse for like pursuing the primary goal. We all do this. And even that is like a step. Like, you have this goal, obviously, of what you're trying to do, and that's good. But then you have this secondary qualifier that is outside your control, that you are relinquishing your control to, of when you actually go. That might not actually be a qualifier or necessary, was that component of the good goals that is it might not be necessary to the opportunity of the goal itself. It just might be like you're just using it as an excuse of when you should start something, which is really an excuse of when to kind of postpone, the start of some goal. It's very easy to trick ourselves into reducing our own agency, but it does always, the start of maximizing our agency is always recognizing and setting a specific goal that is a good goal, that is gaugeable, obtainable, opportune, and defined. And this is agency. I was listening to Yosha Bach, and I think I even did a commentary on the stream that he mentioned this in, but he's mentioned it probably in multiple streams. But that agency is essentially like the ultimate. It's the only. It's he like the main power, the main factor in like whether or not somebody is able to be a successful person. And it's even more fundamental than that. It's like agency is the more it is the necessity in order to even define somebody as a successful person. Because if somebody's very rich and they just hit the lottery, or in some way, it doesn't have to be because they actually played the lottery, but maybe it is, it doesn't matter. But and they, I don't know, they're married, and they have kids, and they don't, seem to be quote unquote successful in their job, but none of it was due to their own like goal seeking. It was just because all of it was convenient, and all of it just kind of happened to them. It's hard to actually say that that person is a success. It's easy to look from the outside at that person and be like, oh yeah, that person's successful. But that's because you have those goals, and you're judging them based on your goals, not based on their goals. And whether or not somebody is actually successful is based on kind of their goals. Because whether or not they succeed. It's like I guess you could say there's two factors at play that determine whether or not somebody is successful. One of them would be God's goals, and the other one would be your goals. So you can succeed at your goals and have your goals not aligned with God's goals, or opposed to God's goals. And that if that's the case, then you will kind of ultimately fail at the only goal that is actually achievable. Because if you're actually that is kind of meaningful, I guess you could say, like achievable and meaningful, you might succeed at your goals, but if they are opposed to God's goals, then what would happen is that ultimately those goals that you have, while they may be, your goals, and you might be able to succeed at them, they are not ultimately fundamentally meaningful goals. It's like if your goal is to own a Bugatti, and you do anything, you sacrifice all morality, just hypothetically, like this is, just an example, in order to get that Bugatti, you could say, well, I achieved my goal of getting Bugatti. But is it actually, is that a meaningful goal? No. Kind of, I guess there is like this meta aspect of a good goal, which is that it is meaningful, which means like it is impactful positively on others, on other someone's. But that doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily required in order for it to be a goal that you could set and achieve for yourself. But I guess it would be kind of necessary in order to like be ultimately meaningful and good, ultimately good, I guess. So you can have a purely materialistic goal and it will not be fruitful, but you can still achieve it. It's interesting because there's always 2 degrees of freedom in sentient singularity theories, like because there's 4 primary perspectives, inside and outside, 2 degrees of freedom, separate and oneness, which is an intrinsic constraint, and an extrinsic constraint, which is also 2 degrees of freedom, from another perspective, from the inverse perspective. So this is the 2 degrees of freedom of like whether or not a goal is achievable, is whether or not it's a goal that's achievable, whether or not your goal is achievable in the framework of your own perspective, itself, or whether or not it's achievable from like the grand perspective of meaning and God. And so those are two degrees of freedom that exist when it comes to like kind of, I guess, ultimately judging whether or not a goal is a good goal. I usually go completely off trail and flip logs until I find cool creatures. Me too. My wife is always laughing at me because every time we go on some hike or something, I just go off path, and she's like, "There goes Tyler off path again." It's like I'm not off path. I just have a different goal than just stay. My goal is not to stay on the path. My goal is to like find something cool, um, and that's a living being usually. Um, so, you know, that's meaningful to me, is to see other living beings there. Like I'm not usually interested in a view unless I'm trying to take a photo, which has this, like a specific action. I'm not just like, my goal is I don't want to just see something, which, there's a lot of cool things to see in the world, and like you don't have to spend hours and hours hiking in the heat or in the cold in order to see something cool. You can drive somewhere cool for a cool view. Um, but for usually an equally cool view, or sometimes even an even more cool view, because a lot of the coolest views, people built roads that go right up to the spot because they want to see a cool view. It doesn't always require just like, investing all this effort in. I'm not ripping on it if that's your thing. Like, I have lots of friends that backpack, and like that's their activity. It's just not mine. Um, uh, Arizona is just right. I love Arizona. Um, or I really like Arizona, as I talked about on the last streams. That we should say I love things. Things we should say I really like things, and I love someone, as an action, to love someone. Not I feel love, but I act lovingly. It's like the better way of using the term. Um, California is effed. I hate to say it as a native Californian. It's not completely, but like right now, it's really having some trouble. I mean, every state has its things, and fire is a thing in California. That is, I mean, it is in Arizona too. It seems like it would be here where I live now, but it's actually not. It has to do, I think, just with the humidity here. Like, people don't worry about fires nearly as much. To some degree, yes, but like not nearly as much, which is odd because it looks like it would be an easy place to burn, but it doesn't seem to be the case because people are constantly like lighting fireworks and stuff in their yard, and nobody worries too much about lighting the entire neighborhood on fire. Um, so all purpose is good, even if the purpose is to do harm. No, no, but you can you can achieve a goal that is set, that is an individual goal. And I guess that when I say a good goal, like a truly good goal would be one that is aligned with logos and generativity. I guess, like a truly, truly good goal would be like generative. It's like you could say there's two different good goals, and good is defined differently in each of these two ways. Good can either mean it's a goal that you can actually like attempt and achieve and manage, and then the other one would be like good as in godly, and so I would say that if it's a goal that is in like just for yourself to own a Bugatti. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with owning a Bugatti, but like if you're sacrificing more, if you're doing immoral things in order to get the Bugatti, that's not good. But it is a gaugeable goal. But because you can be like, I need $1 million to get the Bugatti, and I am you know, 1/10 of the way there. But then there's like good goals that are not necessarily gaugeable, where I would actually change the first term. Instead of gaugeable, I would say generative. It's like never ending in its goodness, um, and its impact. It's like if a goal is good, like truly good, from which means like it's aligned with God's goals, then I would say instead of saying gaugeable, it's like generative. It's like you can see that that it's creating impact, or it's generating impact. It's multiplying meaning. But then that's a good goal from the God's eye view, but a good goal from the individual viewpoint, which just I say good, not meaning good as in capital G good. I mean like lowercase g good. Then it just means like it's something that you can actually like frame and navigate, and that would be gaugeable. So there's two versions of this actually. One of them starts with gaugeable, which is an individual inside view, and the other one is generative, starts with generativity, which is from a God's eye view. I'm gonna make a second version of this. I mean, that's a good, you spark a good point. It's important to recognize that. Sometimes the ideal is that like they're aligned. You know, that the best goal is where what is gaugeable and what is generative are aligned. And sometimes they definitely can be that. Ideally, they should be that, I would say. But it's interesting though, because like those generative goals are not really, they're finite, but they're infinite at the same time. It's like let's say your goal is to like be married. It's like there's a finite aspect to that, which is like you got married. And then there's a generative aspect of that that's kind of infinite, which is stay married, And that's what this sentient singularity, I use that term singularity because it paints this picture in our head of this singular yet like endless structure to some degree. It's like endlessly deep, but singular, meaning one. It's still one structure. It's like singularity. It's like that. It is like ity is like, if that makes sense. It's that generativity at the end. I was making a clip from the last stream, and I was like, the meaning, that's the meaning of that's what truly matters, is that's what's truly meaningful, is like adding to the generativity is what I said. It's like, ity. I wonder if there is an etymological, if that's the right word, meaning to like ity. Etymology, word ending ity. Latin suffix itis usually means to a state of being. This is passed over into English as ity. It refers to real or supposed essential qualities or essence of things or persons. It's like whatness is what it's kind of saying. It says this, listen to this. Partially a borrowing from French, partly a borrowing from Latin, ity is of multiple origins, which means like it is multiplicity. It's multiplying. That's what I mean by this. It's fascinating. There is this, language I have come to just appreciate and so much more than and have an understanding of so much more than I would have claimed to have had, 10 years ago. ITY. It's this. It's perpetuity. ITY. Perpetuity. Um, yeah, he's got excuses. Bet in 20 years he will own up to it. Don't know who you're talking about. Is balance not what's good? What is balance? It's funny because one of the smartest things that I've heard in terms of like work, that like about like one's career or work or life was actually said by not Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos. And Jeff Bezos said, "I don't seek work-life balance." He said, "I seek work-life harmony." And I was like, dang, that's brilliant. Like, you want oneness, not balance. Balance implies like you can have this or you can have this, but they are mutually exclusive. So you kind of just have to go part way with both, but never fully in with either. And he was like, "No, I want work-life harmony." And I was like, that is what you want. You want harmony in your life, not balance. You don't want moderation for moderation's sake. This is what I politically, I am, people would try who try and understand me politically. I've heard a lot of people have been like, "Oh, you're like, are you centrist? Are you like, very right? Or are you very left?" It's like, it depends on the issue, but on certain issues, like within certain context, I lean in fully. And I think that that's usually how it should be from an individual standpoint. Obviously, we have this lack of total coherence to us currently. Eventually, we will unite into a singularity and be stacked. Unite into a singularity and be stacked by the head of us as an assembly. And at that point, like that will be different. But until then, we really have to recognize that none of us actually understands the whole, of any of life, the everything in life, and that we have to kind of work within that constraint, which usually means like try and find a balance politically, but that's on a macro scale. It's not actually how you should approach an issue. Is like, I want to have I'll have balance, or I'll have a moderation type of mentality. It's like, no, you should try and seek the truth of the issue in a way that is actually relevant to the circumstances, and understand what is the correct thing. That doesn't mean you'll get it right all the time, and that's why, from a governmental standpoint, like you need some type of democratic process that kind of allows for, and also like a checks and balances type of process that allows for that moderation type of mentality sometimes. But that doesn't mean that that's actually the ideal. It just means like it's kind of just our current constrained circumstances, or the constraints of our current social circumstances. But it's not actually like true to what is the right thing truly. It's just recognition that no single one of us currently is equipped to be wise enough to actually make the decisions for the whole, in every circumstance. So but yeah, there moderation. I'm not a moderate. There are certain things that I, from each side of, quote unquote, side of politics, that I think is correct. that has their points. Um, and I lean usually into those concepts. But because to be moderate is almost like it's a non-position. It's like you don't you have sacrificed any agency at that point. You're not making decisions. It's like what is moderate is dependent upon the extremes that other, or not even the extremes, but the stances that other people have taken on different sides of the issue. So you're relegating your stance to be based solely on being in between, these two mutually exclusive goals on opposite sides of an issue. It's like you aren't helping at all. You're not harming necessarily, but you're not helping either. It's kind of just like on a single issue. It's kind of like the non-stance stance. It's like it's like the lazy or cowardly position, because if you don't understand an issue well enough to have a perspective on it, then you should just stay out of it. But that's different than being a moderate. It's not you're not like, oh, let's go halfway between these two things, and to try and make no one happy. You don't actually there's no way to make everybody happy on when two people have opposing goals. You end up making no one happy and contributing to the pitting of against each other, the perpetual pitting of one group of people or one individual person against another. If you don't understand an issue well enough to actually like really be committed either one way or another, then you should probably not be involved until you actually are confident in your understanding. Like, it's funny because I had so many people, and one of the streams that I did recently was after the election. I did a stream about how to like navigate thinking about politics, and it wasn't which side you should vote for or anything. It was about like, how do we navigate the news and keep our sanity and make sure that we're not like being manipulated by news, by politics, by family, by friends, by ourselves, whatever. And one of the things that I mentioned is that I had some friends that had come to me and been like, they were complaining about one side of politics, and they were like, this person is bad on this and 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 this. It was like endless issues. It's like climate and immigration and like it doesn't matter which side it was. Like I have people who on both sides of the voting, the bifurcation of voting options always, at least, that would have the same, that would say the same thing. They'd say the same issues too. They would just not have they would just have opposing goals on each of those issues. But the thing is that nobody that I know actually understands half of those issues. And if you're like, it's this and 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 this that's bad or good, it's like you're probably being manipulated because you're being told that what is right about something that you can't about things that you can't possibly know what is it right, because it's too beyond you. And doesn't mean you couldn't understand. It just means like you can't possibly understand all of those things. Nobody understands all of those things true well enough to actually like know what is the right decision in every single decision making event relevant to those issues. And so you're being manipulated as in those circumstances. Like if everything is your concern, then nothing is your concern. That's what I'm trying to say. It's the same thing as being moderate. It's like you're not, you don't have actually it's impossible for you to actually have a perspective. Um, that and have an opinion, which means like have agency. And even within politics, obviously, like I said, there's a social constraint that we're working within until, you know, what theological traditions in the Abrahamic lineage would call the Messianic era, um, uh, or you know, some people would call the human singularity. You know, in but until not the tech singularity, but like the human singularity, which is, you know, one precedes the other, and um, but they would, until that happens, like until we unite into a coherent assembly and get stacked by a sentience that is achieves, you know, wisdom, godly wisdom, like the wisdom of the reverence of God, to revere God. um, but then we are just constrained to this, you know, circumstance. But that is like, that can't actually be your individual political goal. That's not a goal. To be in between two other people that do have goals. One of those goals would be capital G good, and the other one would be lowercase g good at least. And the other one would be capital G and probably lowercase g good, but at least capital G good, which would be like generative, and one of them would be gaugeable. Um, uh, you know, yeah, it's a lot of these political issues are misframed for us completely. We're freaking nobody, the mainstream conversation about what should be done about certain issue is usually not actually what has anything to do with actually helping the situation from a generative, godly, act, like true standpoint. Um, very few, maybe none of our mainstream political back and forths. Um, it'd be funny if someone like Elon Musk won $1 million lottery. He might not even bother to turn in his ticket and claim it. Yeah, probably not. Honestly, I mean, his how much of it is his time worth from a monetary standpoint, which isn't the true metric of measure of how you should measure the value of your time. You know, like every now and then I'm somebody that, like, I get going on a task and I just go and go and go and go and go. And when I'm working during the day, like I really have struggled to stop myself and like take a break and just go eat lunch. And you know, but every time I do, and then I go and I see my daughter, like, and I go and hang out, like today on my lunch, I went and hung out with my daughter for like half an hour. And I don't do that enough. I usually wait till after. And it's just because I get super focused. And while like technically, could I be making? Wouldn't be making more money by skipping lunch. But because that's just not how I'm paid. But not paid out on an hourly basis. But if I was, let like what's more meaningful and objectively generative in the use of your time, taking 30 minutes to spend with your daughter or your son or your wife, or you know, working through that 30 minutes for that extra half hour of pay if you were paid on an hourly basis. Take some time to be with your family. It's very important. Every time I do that, which I mean, I spend time with my family every day, obviously, but every time I take a break from my work during my lunch hour to specifically go upstairs to where my wife and daughter are usually in the middle of the day, I like am grateful that I did it. Um, and even if I was paid by the hour, which I'm not, then I would still be grateful that I did it. It would be worth giving up the money. Because what's the point of money? It's just a tool. Like, it's, if money becomes the goal, it's like saying my goal is walking. To where? Why? Walking is a tool. It's not the goal, unless you're my daughter who can't walk yet. In which case, walking is her goal. But it's like, that's an achievable goal for her. Whereas like for you, it's not really an achievable goal. It's not really an unachievable goal either. It's just not really actually able to be a goal. It's a trick of your mind if you think that it's a goal. My goal is to walk. No, not if you can already walk. Um, uh, hit the like button if you find this valuable. It helps, Uh, the likes are not the goal, but they are a tool. And comments down below. Comments are not a goal, but they are a tool to help boost this content so that it can get to other people and impact them, which is the goal. It's the point of philosophy, is to, as I said in the last stream, primarily the point is to help us deduce how we should live. It's like part of the goal of sentient singularity theory. Like, it's, I've said it on here before that this physicist made this presentation at a TED Talk. I think it was a TED Talk. It wasn't Garrett Lisi, but it was somebody else. And they gave this presentation and they were like, this is what I think the physical theory of everything is. And they were, at the end, they posted all these equations and stuff, and I don't remember any of it because it wasn't relevant, because it literally didn't matter. It means nothing. And he admitted that at the end. He was like, so what does this mean? Nothing. How does this impact us? It doesn't. Now, if it's true and we now understand the universe, what does that mean for us? Nothing. Life goes on. It's like, no, no, you failed, actually. In fact, you wasted an enormous amount of time, because if you truly believe that like understanding string theory is, or whatever it is, like, is not going to lead to generativity, like sentient generativity, like meaning, like the contribution of meaning in everyone's life, not just like, oh, we figured out a new equation and it's like, proposes that the world is 11 dimensions that we will never see, but at least we now know. It's like, don't waste your time on it. Even if it was true that was the case, which there are so many logical reasons why that would break down on a fundamental level. But assuming that, we'll give you the assumption of your fake and false metaphysics, and we'll, stay within your non-framework that you think is a framework, for the sake of argument, you just wasted your time. The problem is that within the framework, there is no point to anything. So it's like, but that breaks it all down, is like, it's not even a waste of your time. It's like, because your time doesn't matter, nothing matters. And so, but if nothing matters, it's not that, well, then why not do this? It's like, why do anything? It's not even like, why live? It's not even like, why end your life? It's like, why be or end your being or do anything? Like, it's like, you just become, everything falls apart. There's not even a way to actually describe what happens logically to your ability to understand the world, or to your worldview, because your worldview literally falls apart to a non-view, like that, to that level. You have no values, you have no goals that matter, you have no value, nothing is valuable, like, it all completely falls apart. Extremist, get him. Mark Zuckerberg said that I can say what I want now. Extremism is a stupid statement too. Seek what is true and what is good in terms of it being generative, at least. Like, that is what we should be doing. That to frame things in terms of extreme and moderate is it's the wrong view. It's like, frame things in terms of what is true and good versus what is false and destructive. true and generative versus false and destructive. Like that's what we should be framing things as, but not in terms of like extreme or moderate. When you're a political leader and you don't fully understand every issue, but you are expected to not take a stance, but issue some type of ruling that spans a bunch of issues, you should still, on an individual level, seek exactly what I just said, not seek moderation. If you don't understand an issue well enough to actually think that you can, after a lot of work, issue some type of real ruling on it, then you should just not rule on it. It's not that you should seek a moderate. Maybe that is like the only thing that you can do if you're still forced to do it by our political system for one reason or another. But if you can avoid actually like the issue, then you should just avoid it. If you're not confident in your competence on the topic. And you don't have to be competent on every aspect of a topic. Nobody is, but you can, your goal is to try and deduce what is relevant. Here's like an example is everybody and that's like hopefully not too I don't know, angering of everyone, but everybody in the political discourse in the United States about student loans is you should either is basically education should be free, or and all student debt should be forgiven and basically should be free going forward, or you definitely need to pay back every loan that you've ever had taken out in your name or that you've taken out. And this is neither one of these perspectives will get us anywhere. Like when it comes to backing up and realizing like, how do we create a system that steers us towards agency and accountability, and which would steer you towards goodness, hopefully, eventually, in terms of loans for education. And that it was one in which you would want accountability for both the loaner and the person taking the loan and the person giving the loan. Right now we have a problem where it's like one side wants no accountability on the person taking the loan, and the other side wants complete accountability of the person taking the loan, and nobody's talking about the accountability of the people who are giving the loan, and that's probably by design. And there have no accountability because you can't declare bankruptcy on student debt, which means there's no incentive to have accountability on the part of the loaners. And so what you would want is a system in which people can declare bankruptcy on their student debt. That's it. It's not about it's all this other conversation is just noise to distract us from the real issue, intentional or not, it doesn't matter. But I this is the solution. It's the only solution, I think, to this issue is you have to be able to declare bankruptcy on all debts that you could possibly take, because otherwise there's no incentive to responsibly loan. And there's no, but the thing is there has to be consequences for taking a loan that is irresponsibly taken. And that means that's why bankruptcy has consequences, but it does give you the ability to escape being a debt slave, and it allows it allows everybody to have some degree of accountability. There's consequences and incentives for everyone. That's what you need. You don't want anybody to be unchecked, but you don't want anybody. You don't want to disempower people either. The goal is to be generative, which means to empower people. That is the goal of. That's what we want. But we want people to have be incentivized towards doing the right thing, but be empowered to also enable them to do the right thing. You need both. because you don't want to force the right thing necessarily, depending on what it is. Obviously, there are some things that you must enforce after the fact, but there's no way to really enforce them prior, unless you're going to put chips in people's heads and do like pre-crime stuff. But we're not there yet. Um, but and that's a whole nother discussion related to agency. But this is like this is like that's an issue where like it's an example of, am I extreme or am I moderate on student debt? If I'm like, yeah, I think you should be able to declare bankruptcy on your student loans. It's completely outside the mainstream discussion, which isn't even a discussion. It's just two sides reacting to each other, and they've given up their agency. They're not thinking about what is the goal here. Their goal is to stop the other one from accomplishing their goal. Which, if two people's goal is to stop the other one from accomplishing, their goal, you just end up being a headless chicken. On my Twitter, I used to have a bio. I used to have this quote that said, "If you chase a headless chicken, you become a headless chicken." It's like that's what politics usually is. Is like it's like it's people chasing a headless chicken and becoming a headless chicken without realizing that they're a headless chicken. It's two headless chickens running around in circles around each other, and they're not going anywhere, and they don't realize it because they have no good goals that are gaugeable and generative and obtainable, opportunity defined. I had to look. Meanwhile, I've been waiting almost a month for a $25 book I ordered, not published by Amazon. Harmony is a privilege. Harmony is the ideal. It's not a privilege. It's not. It's something that must be worked at. You can, it's funny. I just watched this show with my wife, and it's, gosh, what is it called? I don't even know, but it's like a murder mystery about like, then it's like this very wealthy family. It's on Netflix. It's actually pretty good. I don't remember the name, but it's very popular right now. It's like in the, popular right now. And it's this super wealthy family, and there's somebody who dies at a wedding, like right before a wedding, and the maid of honor dies, right before the wedding goes through, and it's a murder mystery. And there's no harmony in their lives. And you would argue that they have every bit of privilege. Like they have wealth, health, looks, there's nothing that they don't have that you would be like, that's a privilege. It's like everybody has blessings and curses. That's true. The concept of privilege is, it's just a way of making excuses as to even like bring it up. It's not that it's false. It's just not relevant. It's like everybody has blessings that are specific, and everybody has curses that are specific. And like our goal is to like grow together, which is what was the term that was used by Whitehead, that was said by Matthew in the last the philosophy professor in my last stream, as like the term for growing together. Let's see. Maybe if say it. I forgot it. Let's see here. Let me look, because it was really, really good. I actually it's rare that I hear a word and I'm like, that's the word. And this was one where I was like, that's the word. I feel like for what it is. And it's a word for a concept that we need a word for, but I don't hear it really outside of like process philosophy, which is, and singularity theory has this, we need this word. I'm recognizing the need for a word for it. I haven't created one. So like, let's look at what it is. Show transcript. Let's see, grow. Mm, um, it starts with C. Dang. Together. I'm searching the transcript. Um, I think that this is it. Hold on. I don't know. It's not a word that I've ever heard outside of this. So that's the problem. Is like I don't even know if like the transcript would recognize it, and I um don't. I'll put it in the let's see, Whitehead. It's such an important term. Um, Presupposition. Maybe it started with it. Gosh, there was just so many instances in which Whitehead was said, and I'm searching it in there. I'll have to find it another time. I don't want to like take up too much time now, but it was so good. If you watched the stream and you um uh concrescence, that's it. Concrescence. Let's look this up. Concrescence. Yep, right here. There we go. Boom. Concrescence. The coalescence or growing together of parts originally separate. It's like harmony. It's like the harmony of being is concrescence. That is what you are seeking, and it is a opportunity for everyone. It is not a privilege for some, but not others. It is available to everyone, always, in every instance of our lives. It is always available. It might not always be obvious, and it certainly is not always obvious, but that usually has to do with a misframing of our perception and our perspective, not as not understanding what is kind of super subjectively relevant, um, or most meaningful. It's like concrescence. I love that word. The meaning of concrescence. The growing together as of tissue or in embryonic parts, coalescence. It's like, it's not just coalescence, it's like the unification of an assembly of sentient beings into a singular being that is, stacked as, the head being headed by, a singular being, like all of your cells being united into you as a singularity. That's concrescence, I think. And if it's not like what most people would describe it as, I think that that should be the definition, because we have words that are perfectly sufficient to describe coalescence that is not that, like coalescence. You would want something that is specifically involved with the harmonious unification of sentient beings into a singular sentient entity, and that word, I think, should probably be concrescence. I've never had a specific word for it. I would just say unification of an assembly of sentient singularities into a singular sentient singularity. Like, and that is a description, though it's not a term. And I've never had a specific term. I've thought about like what would a term be, and I've actually not been able to come up with one. And then I heard that term concrescence in that discussion that Kurt had on his channel um, with Matthew, and I was like, dang, that is the word. Like, it's always good when you don't have to, when you discover that there's this almost perfect word already. Like, you don't have to make a new one, but sometimes you do have to make a new one. Like I said, there's terms in sentient singularity, like a pseudo singularity is an apparently unified structure that appears to be generative, but and might be generative, but it is not um, concrescently united, which would be like a corporation, or and there's a term in sentient singularity theory. I don't know if any of these already existed, but that's a pseudo singularity. And an example of a pseudo singularity, which is another term that I came up with, but it might have already existed, but I didn't know. Maybe it does already exist. I don't know, but it's a corporism, which is like it's the apparent, it's an organism that isn't actually sentient as a singular entity. Like, and I think that a lot of plants are this. Maybe not all plants actually, but most plants where are not like, I don't think that most like a pothos plant, which is like the most common house plant in the world. I don't think your pothos plant is sentient. I think the cells in it are sentient, but it's the same as like Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is as a corporation is not sentient, but the workers are. And if you were looking at it from the outside, you wouldn't necessarily know that Coca-Cola was not a sentient being necessarily, but like there would be signs, but you'd have to know what to look for. Same thing with plants. It's like the fact that you can cut it in half and now you just have two instead of it, you just killed the assembly and now it's going to fall apart. That is evidence that you have what's called a pseudo singularity, not a sentient singularity, which is a concrescent singularity. It's a true singularity. If I cut you in half, or a fly in half, or a worm like an earthworm in half, it does not form multiple humans or multiple flies or multiple earthworms. I used to think that worms, you could cut an earthworm in half and it would form two earthworms. And I remember I was very young. I was a little kid and I was at my grandparents' house and on the East Coast, and they had earthworms everywhere in their yard, and I didn't have earthworms everywhere in my yard because I was from Arizona, and so I didn't know that much about earthworms. And I found all these worms and I cut them in half, a bunch of them, not to be cruel, but because that's how I thought more worms were made. And I remember after this, I was like waiting for more worms to be made, and I left them all on the sidewalk outside, these like cut up worms. And I came back, a few hours later expecting them to be gone, or because they all, came back to life, and then multiple worms and they all went back to the soil, or expected them to see them moving around. And I came back to just a bunch of pieces of bodies of earthworms. And I felt horrible. Like I had just massacred these worms, and I didn't know that that's what I was doing. I thought I was doing a good thing of like, I'm helping make more worms. But I did the opposite. I was not adding to the generativity. I was subtracting from it. And I felt horrible about it, but I'll never forget it either, because the way that it made me feel. And it was like a lesson of like, you can't just cut an earthworm in half and have that be a generative action. It's a destructive action. But there are worms that are commonly studied that are called planaria. They're very commonly used in experiments, and you can cut them into like hundreds of pieces, and each one will become an individual worm. You give it time, and all of a sudden, like a brain forms, and eyes form, and mouth forms, and organs form, and it starts moving around again. And it just makes more of them. This is evidence that this organism is not a sentient singularity. It's a pseudo singularity, even though you could call it an organism. It's what sentient singularity theory would describe, it seems to be a corporism, which means it has no unified sentientness within it. This is a prediction of sentient singularity theory. That is a proposal that comes from my work, which it's hard though, because we can't see inside the worm. And so we can't know whether or not it's sentient or not. We can make assumptions based on our understanding of our own individual experience, which is that, you don't want to be cut in half because it's not going to make two of you. That's not how you make more humans. I know how you make more humans. It's not by doing that. And this is like even a cell. If you take a cell and you cut it in half, it doesn't make more. It can divide itself, but that's different than you cutting it in half. That is a process of actually like it's a multiplicative process that it's going through. It's not like it's just the action of cutting it in half. And I have certain experimental ideas and for certain experiment proposals regarding this specific thing eventually, but this, and even then though, it would be evidence, even if we, I have a proposal of what the results would be given, certain experiment, but even then it's just a proposal. It's like it would be evidence of what I think is going on the other side of the within this apparent being, or this apparent being that is a being that we assume to be a being, or that this apparent being that I actually would assume is not a being. And I think the results would be different regarding this particular experiment that we'll talk about another time. But this, we can't know whether or not someone else is sentient. We can look for evidence, but we can't actually know, because you would have to be them in order to, or be God in order to know whether or not someone is actually sentient or not. And it's interesting because in the previous stream that Kurt and Matthew had, that I gave my commentary on, in their actual full stream, which is linked in the caption of in the description of the commentary I did last week, they talk about the Leibniz's monadology. And Matthew said that Leibniz's monadology assumes that we've all been placed into this harmonious relationship structure by God, and to some degree that's true, but that essentially we're looking at just a movie screen. We're looking, the people that we think that are other beings like us would, if I'm understanding this correctly, they would be like NPCs. Your wife, an NPC. Your brother, an NPC. Your friend at work, an NPC. Your boss, an NPC. You, not an NPC. So there's all these beings that are just interacting with NPCs that aren't really, which means they're not really interacting with anyone other than God and themselves. And I don't think that that's true. I think that if that is a true description of a defining aspect of Leibniz's monadology, I would say that his theory is most likely false. But it's kind of impossible for us to know whether or not it's true. It's false or true, because we don't actually get to peek, under the hood of somebody else's sentience. That's kind of the defining aspect of what, I'm not you, you're not me. You can't see inside my own head. The only God can, because we're within him. But I'm not within you. You're not within me. But we are within God, so he can see, things that we can't. But the reason why I would assume that that's false is because it doesn't destroy meaning, because God still impacts each and every one of us. But to maximize meaning would be for God to impact each and every one of us, and for each and every one of us to impact each other. Like that's you're multiplying meaning more. Which, if your goal is to create meaning, then it seems like your goal would be to maximize meaning at the same time. So, you know, why would you limit it by just having us all interacting with NPCs? I don't think that makes as much sense. But you can't know for sure. But we can look for evidence of it, and that includes like logical evidence. Within the truest foundational metaphysical framework that we can try and understand and deduce, and also look for and assume, and also look for evidence, in other ways involving, observation of others, and also, like, why would God be tricking us like all the time? I don't think he has to do that. Maybe I'm wrong, I could be wrong, but it just doesn't make sense. Is like, why not just have us be in this other framework where like we're not being tricked, like where our entire life is a trick, basically. Like, if Leibniz's monadology is true, then God is like just a liar constantly to all of us, and I don't think that makes that much sense. And it also just intuitively feels wrong, and I'm not saying that is like that means that I'm definitely right, but I'm trying to approach this from as many angles as I can, and it doesn't mean that God doesn't have our best interest in mind, even if he is like lying to us. But I don't think that it's still like the logic breaks down of like, why would God have to constantly lie to us in order for it to be in our best interest inevitably? It's like, maybe God, the only question that I have is like, in terms of like God's honesty with us, and I don't even know if maybe that's even the right question, is like, and this is, I'm not the first to ask this, but did God tell us, in the biblical story of like the garden, the forbidden fruit, it's like, did God want us to eat the apple, is my question. That's not even necessarily, and that's even to even say that if he did, that means God is a liar. I don't even think that is true, because it wasn't God. I mean, I don't know. So that's a very, I'd have to really think about it, and even then, that is one of those questions that I have thought a lot about and have not answered. And I feel like I've actually come to a satisfactory answer on a lot of things that people have thought about for the ages. And I just think I've thought, misframed, and it's so that they can't actually answer the questions they're asking because they're asking the wrong question. It's not that I'm so smart and I figured it out. It's just like they asked the wrong question. And if you ask the right one, it's easy. And if you ask the wrong one, it's impossible. So it's not a matter of like, are you smart? It's not about being smart enough. Did you ask the right question? But I don't know. That's like the kicking off instance of that would really, I feel like maybe there is an element of, I don't know, working within the constraints of what it means to have will, which is like, will is the desire to do what? That which is not being done, essentially, or that which is not and that which is an active action, which is like not the default status, which means like if you're God, your default status is one, your default nature is oneness, and so you have to fight your nature to create multiplicity in order to create meaning. And so like God's actual initial and kind of like, I guess you just say initial, I don't even want to say natural, but like initial state, absent action, intentional action, would be that of oneness, being alone, like there be no one else, as only him, and also meaninglessness. Um, like being is like God's initial state is to be alone and meaningless, and he has to act intentionally in order to be all meaningful and not alone. And so our initial state is that of meaningfulness intrinsically, because we were intentionally made, and of never actually being alone, which is the opposite of God. Um, we have to we have to seek like meaninglessness in order to move towards it, and we have to um, seek loneliness in order to be not alone, but like to the point where like if you move towards aloneness enough, you end up, selling your soul and becoming not even a sentient being anymore, and you've given up your agency for the sake of something that's meaningless, and then now you have no more meaning, and then you're just like talk yourself out of your own consciousness, and you are just a like you're not you're now a pseudo singularity, you know. uh I don't know exactly if that's the way that it works, but it seems like that if it might be possible to do that. Chris Langan said something similar too, and so have like many theologians. Is like it's we it's just, I don't know, it's just it's like your choice, um because the system is not actually attempting to make you meaningless, and it wants you to have agency. The system is sentient, and it, capital I, wants you to have agency. um it's funny, there's like these pronoun people like are arguing about pronouns and stuff all the time, and uh, I saw somebody recently who I went to college with had, on their social media profile, they had put they them, and like I know that this is a female person, but I think about this sometimes, and I'm not like attacking anyone. I think that the world is very confused right now on this, but there does seem to be the need for some type of like pronoun that is not that's like beyond like gendered, but that doesn't mean that it is that you can't use gendered pronouns. It just means like in certain circumstances you would want to, like you could say it as to refer to God as like the system, but like you would just capitalize system to do it, or you would capitalize it. So it'd be a capital I it, capital S system, capital U universe, not lowercase u universe as in the structure, but uppercase U universe to mean the sentient structure, like the someone that is there. And it's just interesting because it's almost like you need this extra degree of freedom that we don't currently, we do have in English. Like that's why you capitalize people's names, but we've also kind of lost in English because we capitalize like books and stuff like that and movies, when it used to, I think you just italicized it before, I think, or maybe you've always done both, I don't know, but like seems like you would want to have a different degree of a different action for those types of things. For just a title of like a piece of work that's, specific, you would maybe not want to capitalize it if it's not a sentient being, like Harry Potter. It's like maybe that shouldn't be capitalized, even though it is a name. It's not like or maybe let's say the name of the book is Order of the Phoenix. It's like, it's not someone's name. It's not a someone. It's like a something, but it's like also a piece of work, and that it's specific. And it doesn't just mean an order of the Phoenix of whatever that means. Like it is a book title. It's like you would want to italicize it, but maybe not capitalize it. But we do both, which kind of screws us up. In Hebrew, there's like, I mean, in original Hebrew, I don't think there is any vowels actually, but the vowels are like lines around the letters. They're not actually like letters themselves. I feel like there's something about that English is missing, that it kind of makes it gives us some degree of freedom that I don't know that is like specific. I'm sure. Otherwise, it wouldn't be the dominating language in the world right now. But it's also limiting us in some way, whether that was original or whether it's due to emergent new practices in terms of like how we handle language and titles and pronouns and names in English or not. I don't know, but like I do think about this sometimes, is like, I think the reason why I think that like people freak out are like spiraling about this is because I think we're asking the wrong question when it comes to like this. There is something that we're recognizing that we're missing something here when we're referring to like the someoneness of something, but it's like we're not, like, we understand referring to the someoneness of someone, but we don't really understand how to refer to the someoneness of something. And I think ideally you would just capitalize it. Capital U universe, capital S system, capital G good. Not lowercase g good, but capital G good. The someoneness of goodness. Capital L love, like the someoneness of love. The original loving actor that is also contextualizing of what is loving. It's like, but you need the correct metaphysics to do this, to be able to structure language properly. We don't have it right now. And let's go to the clip, and then let me go to the chat first. Harmony is a privilege, though. No, like I said, it's not. Pretty misguided. Likely, most of the people I know have no awareness of either side of any issue. Yeah, that's usually true. It takes a lot of effort to understand an issue, and even more than effort, like humility. But always both. Like, always both. My coworker and boss and his lady and kids brought me some venison chili while I was on the clock the other day. Something like that is priceless. Yeah, it's like you had somebody take the time to like do a loving action for you, like do something good for you. They brought you nourishment. They didn't have to do that. God bless those people. And they need you to do it be there in order to make them meaningful. Like, if there's nobody to give the venison to, like, how good is it how meaningful is it? You can't maximize the meaning. You can eat it and it's meaningful to you, but it's not even meaningful. Like, it's like someone can only be meaningful to someone. Something cannot be meaningful to anyone, and someone cannot be meaningful to anything. Only someone can be meaningful to someone. That's it. Capital M meaningful, I guess, maybe. I like convergence. Convergence is condescending. Convergence. No. Concrescence. I love that. It's like, it has this, like, again, to like do hand motions to show words, but it has this like wave, like up, and then it collapses in on itself kind of movement. It's like it ascends and collapses in on itself and like spirals within itself. It's like a wave pattern, which is kind of what a sentience is. It's a loop structure that is loops within loops. Which is what a wave structure is. It's like spinning within itself, looking at itself, but also growing, which is what a wave is. It's spinning within itself and growing. concressing. It's beautiful. It's literally beautiful. I'm like obsessed with this word. It looks like exactly what it should. If that even makes sense. Um, uh, it would be so. My brother and his friends were just default. It would be so. You messed up, but I mean, I'm guessing you mean like it would be terrible if my brother and my friends were just default AI NPC programs. Yeah, exactly. I mean, basically, what that would mean is that's God playing those characters. But it's like, why not just be one character then? You know, like I don't know. So it just telling me what I would expect. I might read a book titled The Multiplication of Meaning. It sounds right. God would have to be 100% honest. It's people and other entities that lie. Yeah, I would say usually that's my assumption too. I have to use lowercase u universe in conjectured physics calculations because only God knows. I think that there are times when you can use lowercase universe, u universe, and other times you might have to assume uppercase u universe in order to make physics predictions, actually. So, I mean, I think that you do. I think you have to assume the sentience of the fundamental, the sentient, the nat that sentience is the fundamental nature of any true of the truest structures. You have to assume that sentience is the fundamental nature of the truest structures that exist in order to make any new physics predictions beyond what we currently have. That would be like coherent, not just like, oh, it could be, you know, I don't know, like what is Sean Carroll's model? The uh, multiverse theory, and it's like I don't even think we would have assumed understand what multiverse means. I believe in multiple verses, but I don't think that they are what Sean Carroll thinks. Um, but here, this when it comes to like free will, this is our current narrative, and like I've said before, I don't know Brian Greene, so I can't say like I like him personally, but from what I've seen, I think I would. He seems like a decent guy, and a humble enough. He's a humble scientist, which is the most important quality. But his metaphysical assumptions are seemingly very wrong, and they don't allow him to make progress, and they don't allow for him to be coherent either. And we're going to see that right now.
Quantum mechanics. Alpha Omega Spy says, I enjoyed listening to you. The laws of physics do not care whether you are a vegetarian or not. So how do you feel whether your choice of being a vegetarian comes from the freedom of your will? And I do not attribute my choice to not eat meat, actually to be a vegan, not just a vegetarian. I do not attribute that to free will. As you know, from either reading my book, chapter 5, I spend a lot of time on free will, because if you're trying to understand what it is to be human on planet Earth within the context of the cosmological unfolding, you better spend a little time thinking about free will, because free will is for many people the very definition of what it means to be a human being. We have the freedom of choice, the freedom of will that's not available to, say, a rock or a dandelion. So do I believe that sensation of
Do we? If you don't believe in freedom of will, then how do we have the freedom of will that's not available to a rock or a dandelion? I would agree with him actually. Like, but that we have freedom of will that is not available to a rock or a dandelion. But I don't think that dandelion or rock has will. Actually, I think one of them is a pseudo singularity, and one of them isn't even an apparent singularity. But why should you focus on that which you think is false? It doesn't make any sense. Even internally, it doesn't make sense. And this is what I've said before: is like, if you can't make sense of yourself, then you can't make sense of the world. So, and if you don't have will, like any agency, then you don't exist. There is no you. It is the definer of your you-ness. And also, like, he says, why, if you're going to be a physicist, you better focus on free will if you want to understand reality. It's like, because, and his reasoning is because many people ascribe free will as being central to the human experience. It's like, but you think it's false. Like, what? It's like, if everybody is jumping off a bridge, should you do it? It doesn't, it falls apart. There's no way to make sense of it. You cannot make sense of that which doesn't make sense. You have to propose a nonsensical framework in order to make sense, in order to attempt to make sense of that which is nonsensical, and you still won't succeed.
Is real. I do not. I think it is grossly misleading. I think we do not have the freedom of will that our intuition suggests that we do. So when it comes to any of my choices, vegan, vegetarian, choice of spouse, did I freely ask my wife?
You can't even use the word choice. Do you see what I mean? Everything falls apart. Your language falls apart in his metaphysical, given his metaphysical assumptions. If your world falls apart and everything starts to not make sense anymore, even the way in which you speak doesn't make sense anymore, and everything starts to lose coherence, you should probably assume that you are making some false assumptions that are pretty fundamental.
To marry me. I did not. I don't know if she's watching right now. Actually, I can see her window from here, and she seems to be not reacting to what I just said. So I suspect that she's not listening, or it's on mute or something. But I do not believe that I freely asked my wife to marry me, because I don't believe that I freely make any choices. It felt as though.
I will say this, as somebody who has proposed to a woman before and got married and is married and is a man in the world today who did not come from a religious community in which abstinence before marriage is the norm, it takes intentional choice making for the most part in order for you to be like, you know what? My nature isn't motivating me to marriage, because there's no, if you come from a community where like you're not gonna have sex before marriage, then like the most strong instinctual drive that exists in probably any of us is pushing you to get married right away. That's why, religious people, one of the reasons they get married so young. Not, I actually think that their perspective is right. I think the way I was raised was incorrect, but what it did allow for is the recognition that like this action of saying, you know what, there's always going to be someone else in the world, so if you're like, oh well, what if there's somebody younger, richer, prettier, funnier who I get along with better, everybody can do that always, because there's always more people being born, hopefully. Otherwise, like, everything is just ended, which is not gonna happen. But and that, like, that means you have to just be like, you know what, this is the right thing to do, even if my nature isn't, as a man, pushing me to do it, because I'm not, I didn't wait for marriage to have sex. So, and I wish I did, but I didn't understand that it was the right thing to do at the time, because that's not how I was raised and I wasn't wise enough. But the point is that if you're getting that, then you don't have the same thing that religious people have, where like their nature is aligned with pushing them towards this action. So like you in this circumstance have to be like, I have to actually intentionally make this choice of like doing this, committing to this thing that's not really like being pushed by my nature right now. It's not that I was opposed to marriage. It's just like I realized there's like, if I'm waiting for my instincts to kick in and be like, you need to get married now, like it just wasn't going to happen, because that's just not there. I wasn't in the in the framework that would push for that. There is a framework that does push for that, and it's like abstinence till marriage is what pushes for that. Or when you eventually get FOMO because everybody else is married. But like absent that, just recognizing that this is the right thing to do, and so I have to make the choice to do it. Gave me that is a blessing that I add that, I think. Because it really let me like take a step back and like look at what is agency. And it was like a choice to go against my nature. It wasn't that I was opposed to marriage. It was that I wasn't motivated to it. I always wanted to get married, but like eventually I realized I was like, what am I waiting for? You know, the perfect person? How do you know who that is? Just make sure it's, and I've said this before, there are 4 qualities that I say are necessary in a spouse, which is like, are you good at solving problems together? Are you attracted, physically and mentally to each other? Do you have aligned goals and values? And, uh, did I say you have to be good at solving problems together? It's in my marriage stream. Watch my stream on marriage that my wife and I did together on this, and I talk about it. But there's 4 qualities that every potential spouse must meet, and if they don't meet all of those things, then they're not a good potential for a spouse. But there's probably multiple people in the world that would meet all 4 of those qualities for you, and you have to make a choice of which one it's going to be. And that's part of agency. It's actually a gift. It's like, this is one of the most important decisions of your life, and you get to make that decision. And Brian Greene says, I didn't have any choice in marrying my wife. It felt like I did, but I'm not going to trust my own first person experience of what, life. For some reason, I'm going to trust what? You can't even say I'm trusting this understanding of the world instead over my first person experience. There is no other understanding that's coherent, because like I said, it all falls apart. But it's the same thing. But if you kind of like give it the benefit of the doubt for the sake of argument, that doesn't even make sense. But like, that's what I mean. We're trying to make sense of a nonsensical framework. That it's like you touch water that is boiling hot and somebody told you it was cold, and you're like, yeah, you know what? It feels hot, but I don't think it's hot. That's nonsensical. It's legitimately insane. People who say the definition of insanity is trying the same thing multiple times and expecting a different result, but nobody actually thinks about whether like the deep metaphysical implications of that phrase. And I have, but I would say that there's even more important. I'm not saying it's false, but like there's an even more important one, which is like prioritizing secondhand information above firsthand experience is the definition of insane. More so than even trying multiple things, the same thing multiple times and expecting a different result. I would say, I'm not saying that that's like not insane, but I would say, I don't even want to say that's insane. It's probably not the most sensible approach to solving a problem. That said, it's not necessarily insane either, because circumstances can change that you don't know how the circumstances have changed, but you can maybe you're just assuming that no individual instance of existence is the same as any other instance of existence. So you're just kind of like, okay, well, I don't know what may have changed between now and then, but let's just try it again, because maybe something changed that I didn't see. And if we get a different result, then maybe we'll try and deduce what changed. But, that's not actually an insane approach. But to prioritize secondhand information above firsthand experience is insane. You've stopped thinking. Brian Greene, stop thinking. We all do this sometimes. But your goal should be to minimize the amount of times that you do this. That doesn't mean even if you never, ever failed at prioritizing firsthand experience above secondhand information, you would always get things right. It just means like you would always be actually thinking. That's all it means. And that's the only way to actually make sense of the world most of the time, or have any chance at making sense of it.
making that choice is an easy one, in case she's listening. But I did have the sensation of the freedom of will that we all have, and the sensation is real. But the actual act of asking my wife to marry me was the result of particles in my brain moving in a particular manner that resulted in my mouth and vocal cords making certain motions that my wife interpreted as me asking her to marry her. And none of those particle motions were under my control. What would it mean for particle motion to be under my control? It's absurd. I don't control the motion of particles. How would I do that? The laws of physics determine particle motion. And what I think and feel is the result of that motion.
The laws of physics do not determine, like, they do not cause the motion of particles. They constrain the degrees of freedom of the motion of particles, but they do not determine whether or not particles move. You choosing to move is what makes anything move, including particles. You are a collection of cells, which are individual particles. You are an individual organism, which is a sentient being, which is unified and concrescent, and therefore a particle, you could say, meaning like a thing, like an isolated thing. And those cells are made of molecules that are particles. You say particles of, carbon, particles of proteins, I don't know. And then those are made of atoms, which you could say are particles. And then those are made of protons and neutrons, which you could say are particles. And now you can't actually go any further, and you can call them particles, but as soon as you do that to quarks and electrons, you've changed the meaning of particle. So you might not realize it, but like you've changed the meaning, at least in my metaphysical framework. So that doesn't, make sense. But those should be points, not particles. If you're gonna, maybe you just don't even use the term particle, but use the term sentient singularity versus pseudo singularity versus, points of force and force points versus focus points, which would be like quarks and electrons and neutrinos and such. But the point is that, like, of course you control the motion of particles. You're doing it. You're talking, and it's like he doesn't even understand that what it means to control the motion of particles. It's like the wrong framework. Even it's like it's just he's operating within a framework that you can't make sense within, so he's not able to do it. And you're seeing it break down. Like he can't even. He says to his wife, he's like, "If she's watching, I didn't choose to marry her, but it felt like I did, and it was an easy choice for her. Just so in case she's watching, it's like, so now you're lying to your wife, but are you really lying to your wife? Do you have any agency? Like it's just the whole thing falls apart. Everything falls apart. Your ability to make sense of anything falls apart." That's what happens when you have a false foundation. You can't build anything that stands on a false foundation.
Even know what it would mean for me to control the particle. What does that mean? It doesn't make any sense. How can I, a collection of particles, control the motion of the particles? I don't have some kind of extra sensory force capacity. Electromagnetism, weak, strong nuclear forces, gravitational forces, those are the forces that those are the forces that yield the motion of particles. So the motion of particles depends on those forces, and those forces, I don't control them, neither do you. So even beyond vegetarian, vegan, free will, none of it do I believe emerge.
He says, how could I don't even know how could I even know what it means to control the force of particles? It's like, that's actually probably the most accurate thing that he said within his framework. But then he says, no, this is actually like the motion of particles. What controls the motion of particles? It's like, so you can't even know what it means, but you know what it means enough to say that you can't, and also enough to say that this is how it's done. It's just nonsense. It's not coherent at all. And like I said, I respect Brian Greene a lot. I think that the fact that he's willing to engage with these questions is great. I think that he is humble, and I think that that is one of the most important qualities in a. It is a critical quality in a scientist. In anyone seeking the truth, that is, or seeking to understand anything, that is a critical quality. But it is also a critical quality to have correct metaphysical foundations to build on if you're going to actually succeed.
From the traditional notion of the freedom of choice. So Zero Skull asks, God exists as an idea in the mind of everyone who has such an idea, but it is different in every mind, therefore imaginary. Well,
and he's humble enough in this next clip to I actually agree with basically what he says, if I remember correctly, which is just that, you know, that's not necessarily like the right definition of like, it could be, God could be true, and you know, somebody has the right there might be a correct concept and also universally true conceptualization of God, but like, and simultaneously a specific conceptualization of God that's also true, you know, um, but that doesn't make it necessarily imaginary. And he says something along those lines, and he's right. But I hope like the point was made is like, he can't make sense of even the language that he's using to himself, to his wife, within physics, within logic, when trying to argue this. Within my framework, actually, veganism makes sense, even though I'm not a vegan. But you know, if plants are pseudo singularities, then you're decreasing the amount of concrescent, you know, assemblies that you are destroying when you eat. You're destroying less concrescent assemblies than if you eat plants than if you ate a cow. You know, because if a cow is a sentient singularity and a dandelion is a pseudo singularity, then you're only killing the cells and also, you know, the molecules that are, you know, sentient proteins or whatever, and then atoms and hadrons in that. Maybe not even the hadrons, and maybe not even that, and not even the atoms, but maybe just the cells and molecules, some of the molecules. But you're not like destroying a being, you know, that is on your level, that adds to, you know, the number and the depth of the number, the amount, the quantity, and the quality of the concrescent structures that you are disassembling. So it's interesting. Sentient singularity theory, his everything that, you know, he feels makes sense actually within my framework. Maybe you should assume that should be an explored potentiality as far as what is true, and see if it actually allows you to make predictions and build a, you know, metaphysics and physics framework that, you know, goes further than what we currently talk about. You know, the force, you could say these are the four forces, but like, is there another force than these four forces? It's like, force is a gravity, electromagnetism, the strong force, and the weak force. Like, those aren't the only true force is agency. And we, within an agent, being within a greater agent, perceive the actions of the greater agent around us as, you know, stratified perspectives that don't, you know, that aren't perceived as a singular sentient being because we're within it. So we're seeing, you know, it's like, you know, the whole like, oh, everybody touches this part of the elephant and like they don't understand that it's an elephant, but like, you know, they're seeing a different or sensing a different part. Like, imagine you're inside the elephant and you're doing that. That's what we are. We're like the cells inside the elephant trying to feel for an elephant. Good luck. You're not even next to it. You're in it. It's different. And so you kind of have to, like, you can't just look out there to, that includes particle accelerators and, you know, uh, telescopes. Like, you might think they're doing the opposite things, but from a fundamental perspective, they're both looking for the forest through the trees. Both of them. You're just, one of them is looking like this, and one of them is looking like this, but like you're still in the forest. Like, just because you look at something really small in the forest versus you try and look at something really big in the forest, you're still in the forest. Like, it doesn't, neither one of these things actually changes whether or not you are able to see the big picture. You can't. So it's a constraint. No cell in your body sees you. Not one of them. I have to. Okay, many worlds. Yeah, many worlds. God spoke everything into existence in the Hebrew letters. The mouth shapes when reading it from left to right. Also, read the stars. Free will of choices. Love has no expectations. Love has desires, and I don't know if expectations is the right term, but maybe I got to think more about it. But love at least has desires. You want the best for those. To love someone is to want what is best for them, and that doesn't mean you expect what is best for them, but you want what is best for them. Everyone perceives God the way they know how. That's true. But everyone can increase their perception of God. Sometimes that's due to God's choice, sometimes that's due to our choice, but usually it should be due to both of our choices. It might not be possible without both of our choices, actually. Everyone has their own hell and heaven in their head. It's about our nervous system and frequencies. I don't know if it's. I'm not saying you're wrong, but I try not to avoid. I don't know if saying it's your nervous. Everybody, it's about our nervous system and frequencies is the way. I'm not going to say the right way to say it or the wrong way to say it. It's not the way I would say it, but I'm not saying you're wrong either. Everybody. I don't know if it's right to say everybody has their own hell and heaven, because it depends on how you're defining it. Like, if you're defining heaven as the state of the static save structure that comes after the dynamic change space that we're currently in, like, then while you're alive, that would be heaven or hell. That's how I would usually define it. It just depends on, like, I don't know. Like, I don't think that the eternal hell exists, and if it does, then I don't think we understand the concept of eternity when we say that. It means, like, I think we think that means endless. That's not what eternity means. Eternity is outside. It's beyond time. It's not endless time. You're not tortured forever. It's just you're beyond the change space. You're not in time anymore. So eternity in heaven and eternity in hell is not the same as, like, forever now, like, in the same way that time is here. It's different. It's like this weird space of simultaneously endless and instantaneous. But that's not the right way to look at it, but, like, it's kind of closer than to say eternity is closer. It's closer to simultaneously instantaneous and endless than it is to endless or finite. It's like, it's just beyond time. It's beyond change, is what it means. It's like, it's beyond change. But I don't know, I have not experienced that yet. But I will say that I don't believe that God is sadistic and would just torture us forever for the sake of just doing it. Like, if you're being tortured in the afterlife, it's probably for a purpose, that, and it's part of a process that's actually eventually good. And it's not even that God is torturing you. Like, I think you, after this, like, if there is still a you, then you actually, you go outside time, you get kind of a God's eye view, probably. This is my assumption for many reasons, but like, this is my assumption, of outside of the change space, which means like God's eye view, and that means you see the result of every good action that you've ever taken and every bad action that you've ever taken. You see how that action that you did that was small but like bad resulted in this and this and this and this and this, and how it impacted like all these people and beings in a negative way. And it must be soul crushing to view that. But then every good deed that you've done as well, every good thing that you've done, you also see all the impact that it's done to everyone, every cell, every molecule, every atom, every hadron, every person, every, not plant, every, most likely not plant, most likely not every, not planaria, but most likely earthworm, you know, and you see all of that, and like, that is, that's a profound state. That's all I will say. Um, and it's probably a process. The only change that probably can, that probably like occurs like after, in the afterlife, is like you in this instance, in this instanternal state, which is like eternity. Instanternal. It's funny because like, or like it's all, yeah, you almost kind of like get eternity from like merging instantaneous and like infinity. You almost get like eternity. It's odd, but it also makes sense. um but yeah, I mean, I think that that's kind of what happens if there is this you. Everybody goes through that, and like, depending on what you've done, like, that's a more pleasant or less pleasant process, but it's going to be both for everyone. That's what I will say, because nobody has only done good things. At least, like, if there is anyone that's only done good things, it's probably only one person who's done, and that person would be like a messianic figure. It's not, they would be not a normal person. If anybody was ever perfect, it would be probably one. And I don't even know if like you could say that. It's like, maybe it's just most perfect of all someone's within God. The only someone that is perfect is God. Anyone within God, maybe you could be the most perfect, but I don't know if you can be perfect. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. I don't know. I'm not perfect. That's why I can't know. Free will of choices. Love. Everyone everyone has their own. Okay, yeah. I think I've answered everything. I think I've talked about everything. I really enjoyed the stream. I hope it was meaningful and valuable. I hope that my models of good goals, there's two of them we came up with. One of them is gaugeable, obtainable, opportunity, and defined, and the other one would be generative, obtainable, opportunity, and defined. And I hope that those are helpful to you. I have found them helpful to me. And that's the goal of philosophy. Thank you, everyone. Please hit the like button and share this if you enjoyed it. Peace.